language is often invoked in the name of freedom of expression itself. However, on closer inspection, the opposite is true, for freedom of speech and expression is guaranteed precisely by the certainty of language and the fact that every term is anchored in the truth. It is painful to see how, especially in the West, the space for genuine freedom of expression is rapidly shrinking. At the same time, a new Orwellian-style language is developing, which, in an attempt to be increasingly inclusive, ends up excluding those who do not conform to the ideologies that are fueling it. Unfortunately, this leads to other consequences that end up restricting fundamental human rights, starting with the freedom of conscience. In this regard, conscientious objection allows individuals to refuse legal or professional obligations that conflict with moral, ethical, or religious principles deeply rooted in their personal lives. This may be the refusal of military service in the name of nonviolence, or the refusal on the part of doctors and healthcare professionals to engage in practices such as abortion or euthanasia. Conscientious objection is not rebellion, but an act of fidelity to oneself. At this moment in history, freedom of conscience seems increasingly to be questioned by states, even those that claim to be based on democracy and human rights. This freedom, however, establishes a balance between the collective interest and individual dignity. It also emphasizes that a truly free society does not impose uniformity, but protects the diversity of consciences, preventing authoritarian tendencies and promoting an ethical dialogue that enriches the social fabric. In a similar way, religious freedom risks being curtailed. As Benedict XVI recalled, this is the first of all human rights because it expresses the most fundamental reality of the person. The most recent data shows that violations of religious freedom are on the rise, and that 64% of the world's population suffers serious violations of this right. In requesting that the religious freedom and worship of Christians be fully respected, the Holy See asks the same for all other religious communities. On the 60th anniversary of the promulgation of the Declaration Nostra Aetate, one of the fruits of the Second Vatican Ecumenical Council that concluded on December 8, 1965, I had the opportunity to reiterate the categorical rejection of all forms of anti-Semitism, which unfortunately continues to sow hatred and death. I likewise emphasize the importance of cultivating the Jewish-Christian dialogue, deepening our common biblical roots. On that same commemorative occasion, the meeting with representatives of other religions allowed me to renew my appreciation for the progress made in recent decades along the path of interreligious dialogue. Indeed, in every sincere religious quest, there is a reflection of the one divine mystery that embraces all creation. In this regard, I ask all the nations to guarantee full freedom of religion and worship to each of their citizens. However, it cannot be overlooked that the persecution of Christians remains one of the most widespread human rights crises today, affecting over 380 million believers worldwide. They suffer high or extreme levels of discrimination, violence, and oppression because of their faith. This phenomenon impinges on approximately 1 in 7 Christians globally, and it worsened in 2025 due to ongoing conflicts, authoritarian regimes, and religious extremism. Sadly, all of this demonstrates that religious freedom is considered in many contexts more as a privilege or concession than a fundamental human right. Here I would especially call to mind the many victims of violence, including religiously motivated violence in Bangladesh, in the Sahel region, and in Nigeria, as well as those of the serious terrorist attack last June on the parish of St. Elias in Damascus. Nor do I forget the victims of jihadist violence in Cabo Delgado, Mozambique. At the same time, we must not forget a subtle form of religious discrimination against Christians, which is spreading even in countries where they are in the majority, such as in Europe or the Americas. There, they are sometimes restricted in their ability to proclaim the truths of the gospel for political or ideological reasons, especially when they defend the dignity of the weakest, the unborn, refugees and migrants, or promote the family. In its international relations and actions, the Holy See consistently takes a stand in defense of the inalienable dignity of every person. It cannot be overlooked, for example, that every migrant is a person and as such has inalienable rights that must be respected in every situation. Not all migrants move by choice, but many are forced to flee because of violence, persecution, conflict, and even the effects of climate change, as in various parts of Africa and Asia. In this year, which also marks the 75th anniversary of the International Organization for Migration, I renew the Holy See's hope that the actions taken by states against criminality and human trafficking will not become a pretext for undermining the dignity of migrants and refugees. The same considerations apply to prisoners who can never be reduced to the crimes they have committed. On this occasion, I wish to express my heartfelt gratitude to the governments that have responded positively to my venerable predecessor's appeal for gestures of clemency during the Jubilee year. It is my hope that the spirit of the Jubilee will permanently and structurally inspire the administration of justice so that penalties are proportionate to the crimes committed, dignified conditions are guaranteed for prisoners, and above all, efforts are made to abolish the death penalty, a measure that destroys all hope of forgiveness and renewal. Nor can we forget the suffering of so many prisoners held for political reasons in many countries. Furthermore, from a Christian perspective, human beings are created in the image and likeness of God, who, by calling them into existence out of love, has at the same time called them to love. This vocation is revealed in a privileged and unique way within the family. It is in this context that we learn to love and foster the capacity to serve life, thus contributing to the development of society and the Church's mission. Despite its centrality, the institution of the family faces two crucial challenges today. On the one hand, there is a worrying tendency in the international system to neglect and underestimate its fundamental social role, leading to its progressive institutional marginalization. On the other hand, we cannot ignore the growing and painful reality of fragile, broken, and suffering families afflicted by internal difficulties and disturbing phenomena, including domestic violence. The vocation to love and to life, which manifests itself in an important way in the exclusive and indissoluble union between a woman and a man, implies a fundamental ethical imperative for enabling families to welcome and fully care for unborn life. This is increasingly a priority, especially in those countries that are experiencing a dramatic decline in birth rates. Life, in fact, is a priceless gift that develops within a committed relationship based on mutual self-giving and service. In light of this profound vision of life as a gift to be cherished, and of the family as its responsible guardian, we categorically reject any practice that denies or exploits the origin of life and its development. Among these is abortion, which cuts short, cuts short a growing life and refuses to welcome the gift of life. In this regard, the Holy See expresses deep concern about projects aimed at financing cross-border mobility for the purpose of accessing the so-called right to safe abortion. It also considers it deplorable that public resources are allocated to suppress life rather than being invested to support mothers and families. The primary objective must remain the protection of every unborn child and the effective and concrete support of every woman so that she is able to welcome life. Likewise, there's the practice of surrogacy. By transforming gestation into a negotiable service, this violates the dignity both of the child, who is reduced to a product, and of the mother, exploiting her body and the generative process and distorting the original relational calling of the family. Similar considerations can be extended to the sick, to those who are elderly or isolated, who at times struggle to find a reason to continue living. Civil society and states also have a responsibility to respond concretely to situations of vulnerability, offering solutions to human suffering such as palliative care, and promoting policies of authentic solidarity rather than encouraging deceptive forms of compassion such as euthanasia. A comparable reflection can be made concerning the many young people who are forced to confront numerous hardships, including drug addiction. In order to prevent millions of young people around the world from falling victim to substance abuse, concerted efforts are required to eradicate this scourge upon humanity and the drug trafficking that fuels it. Together with these efforts, there must be adequate policies for recovery from addiction, as well as greater investment in human development, education, and the creation of employment opportunities. In light of these challenges, we firmly reiterate that the protection of the right to life constitutes the indispensable foundation of every other human right. A society is healthy and truly progresses only when it safeguards the sanctity of human life and works actively to promote it. The aforementioned considerations lead me to believe that in the current context, we are seeing an actual short circuit of human rights. The right to freedom of expression, freedom of conscience, religious freedom, and even the right to life are being restricted in the name of other so-called new rights, with the result that the very framework of human rights is losing its vitality and creating space for force and oppression. This occurs when each right becomes self-referential, and especially when it becomes disconnected from reality, nature, and truth. Distinguished ambassadors, while St. Augustine highlights the coexistence of the heavenly and earthly cities until the end of time, our era seems somewhat inclined to deny the city of God its right of citizenship. It seems that only the earthly city exists, enclosed exclusively within its borders. Seeking only imminent goods undermines that tranquility of order, which for Augustine constitutes the very essence of peace, which concerns society and nations as much as the human soul itself, and is essential for any civil coexistence. In the absence of a transcendent and objective foundation, only self-love prevails, to the point of indifference to God, who governs the earthly city. Yet, as Augustine notes, great is the folly of pride in those individuals who think that the supreme good can be found in this life, and that they can become happy by their own resources. Pride obscures both reality itself and our empathy toward others. It is no coincidence that pride is always at the root of every conflict. Consequently, as I recalled in my message for the World Day of Peace, we lose our sense of realism and surrender to a partial and distorted view of the world, disfigured by darkness and fear, thus paving the way for the mentality of confrontation, which is the precursor to every war. We see this in many contexts, starting with the ongoing war in Ukraine and the suffering inflicted on the civilian population. Faced with this tragic situation, the Holy See strongly reiterates the pressing need for an immediate ceasefire and for dialogue motivated by a sincere search for ways leading to peace. I make an urgent appeal to the international community not to waver in its commitment to pursuing just and lasting solutions that will protect the most vulnerable and restore hope to the afflicted peoples. I likewise emphasize the Holy See's full willingness to support any initiative that promotes peace and harmony. At the same time, we see this in the Holy Land, where, despite the truce announced in October, the civilian population continues to endure a serious humanitarian crisis, adding further suffering to that already experienced. The Holy See is especially attentive to any diplomatic initiative that seeks to guarantee to the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip a future of lasting peace and justice in their own land, as well as to the entire Palestinian people and the entire Israeli people. In particular, the two-state solution remains the institutional perspective for meeting the legitimate aspirations for both peoples. Yet sadly, there has been an increase in violence in the West Bank against the Palestinian civilian population, which has the right to live in peace in its own land. The escalating tensions in the Caribbean Sea and along the American Pacific coast are also a cause for serious concern. I wish to repeat my urgent appeal that peaceful political solutions to the current situation should be sought, keeping in mind the common good of the peoples and not the defense of partisan interests. This pertains in particular to Venezuela in light of recent developments. In this regard, I renew my appeal to respect the will of the Venezuelan people and to safeguard the human and civil rights of all, ensuring a future of stability and concord. To this end, inspiration may be drawn from the example of two of its children who I had the joy of canonizing last October, José Gregorio Hernández and Sister Carmen Rendiles. May their witness inspire the building of a society founded on justice, truth, freedom, and fraternity, and thus enable the nation to rise from the grave crisis that has afflicted it for so many years. Other crises are scattered across the global landscape. First, I refer to the desperate situation in Haiti, marked by many forms of violence, from human trafficking to forced exile and kidnappings. In this regard, it is my hope that with the necessary and concrete support of the international community, the country will be able to take the necessary steps as soon as possible to restore democratic order, end violence, and achieve reconciliation and peace. Nor can we forget the situation that has affected the Great Lakes region of Africa for decades, plagued by violence that has claimed many victims. I encourage the parties involved to seek a definitive, just, and lasting solution that will put an end to a conflict that has lasted far too long. Similarly, I think of the situation in Sudan, which has been transformed into a vast battlefield, as well as the continuing political instability in South Sudan, the youngest country in the family of nations, which came into being following the referendum 15 years ago. We cannot fail to mention the intensifying signs of tension in East Asia and to express hope that all parties involved will adopt a peaceful and dialogue-based approach to the contentious issues that are a source of potential conflict. My thoughts turn in particular to the grave humanitarian and security crisis afflicting Myanmar, which was further aggravated by the devastating earthquake last March. With renewed intensity, I make an appeal that paths of peace and inclusive dialogue be courageously chosen so as to guarantee everyone fair and timely access to humanitarian aid. To be authentic, democratic processes must be accompanied by the political will to pursue the common good, to strengthen social cohesion, and to promote the integral development of every person. At the heart of many of the situations I've mentioned, we can see something that Augustine himself pointed out, namely the persistent idea that peace is only possible through the use of force and deterrence. While war is content with destruction, peace requires continuous and patient efforts of construction as well as constant vigilance. Such efforts are required of everyone, starting with the countries that possess nuclear arsenals. I think in particular of the important need to follow up on the New START Treaty, which expires in February. Indeed, there's a danger of returning to the race of producing ever more sophisticated new weapons, also by means of artificial intelligence. The latter is a tool that requires appropriate and ethical management, together with regulatory frameworks focused on the protection of freedom and human responsibility. Dear ambassadors, notwithstanding the tragic situation before our eyes, peace remains a difficult yet realistic good. As Augustine reminds us, peace is the aim of our good, because it is the very aim of the city of God, to which we aspire, even unconsciously, and of which we can enjoy a foretaste even in the earthly city. During our pilgrimage on this earth, peacemaking requires humility and courage. The humility to live truthfully and the courage to forgive. In the Christian life, we see these virtues reflected at Christmas, when truth, the eternal Word of God, becomes humble flesh. And at Easter, when the condemned righteous one forgives his persecutors and grants them his life as the risen one. Moreover, if we look more closely, there is no shortage of signs of courageous hope in our time, and we must constantly support them. I think, for example, of the Dayton Accords, which 30 years ago put an end to the blood-stained war in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Despite difficulties and tensions, they opened up the possibility of a more prosperous and harmonious future. I think, too, of the joint declaration of peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan, signed last August. We hope this will pave the way for a just and lasting peace in the South Caucasus and resolve the outstanding issues to the satisfaction of both parties. I likewise call to mind the efforts made in recent years by the Vietnamese authorities to improve relations with the Holy See and the conditions in which the Church functions in the country. These are all seeds of peace that need to be cultivated. This coming October will mark the 8th century of the death of St. Francis of Assisi, a man of peace and dialogue, universally recognized even by those who do not belong to the Catholic Church. His life shines brightly, for it was inspired by the courage to live in truth and the knowledge that a peaceful world is built starting with humble hearts turned towards the heavenly city. A humble and peace-loving heart is what I wish for each of us and for all who dwell in our countries at the beginning of this new year. Thank you.
Eccellenze, gentili signori, Si invitano cortesemente i capi missioni, accompagnati dai rispettivi consorti, a dirigersi verso l'incontro col Santo Padre e i superiori della Segreteria di Stato per il saluto personale, seguendo le indicazioni fornite dal nostro personale addetto. Al termine del saluto, i capi missione sono pregati di recarsi senza i consorti presso la Cappella Sistina per la foto di gruppo. Si richiede agli altri membri dei seguiti diplomatici di rimanere nei posti loro assegnati. Excellencies, distinguished guests, the heads of missions accompanied by their respective spouses are kindly invited to proceed to the meeting with the Holy Father and the superiors of the Secretary of State for a personal greeting, following the directions provided by our staff. At the conclusion of the greeting, the heads of missions are requested to proceed without their spouses to the Sistine Chapel for the group photograph. All the other members of the diplomatic entourages are kindly asked to remain in their assigned seats. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, le chef de mission accompagné de leurs conjoints respectifs sont cordialement invités à se diriger vers la rencontre avec le Saint-Père et le supérieur de la Secrétariat d'État pour une salutation personnelle, en suivant les indications fournies par notre personnel. À l'issue de la salutation, les chefs de mission sont priés de se rendre sans leur conjoint à la chapelle Sixtine pour la photographie de groupe. Il est demandé à tous les autres membres de la délégation diplomatique de rester à les places assignées. Excelencias, señoras y señores, se invita cordialmente a los jefes de misión acompañados de sus respectivos cónyuges a dirigirse al encuentro con el Santo Padre y los superiores de la Secretaría de Estado para el saludo personal, siguiendo las indicaciones proporcionadas por nuestro personal. Al finalizar el saludo, se solicita a los jefes de misión que se dirijan sin sus cónyuges a la Capilla Sixtina para la fotografía grupal. Se pide a los demás miembros de las delegaciones diplomáticas que permanezcan en sus asientos asignados.